the beta edition of the 4th edition of Twilight 2000 has come out, and I thought I'd start by having a look at what was probably the most contentious part of the first version, the alpha, which was the background. Well, the background is now in the referee's manual, based on the logic that players wouldn't necessarily know everything that's occurred. It was done that way in the first edition of Twilight 2000, if you remember that. There are still big gaps, there are always going to be in something like this, and I've got no doubt it's going to fill. But basically, let's just run through what's happened. 1989, Berlin Wall comes down, we're following real history. 1990, we get the Iraqi invasion of Kuwait and the Gulf War and German reunification. I always think that's actually potentially a very nice little flashpoint. It's not particularly well known that the British Army went on standby when the Berlin Wall came down, and it has the potential for a very interesting sort of scenario, and could even give a really good idea of the West actually moving east, which was actually one of the Russians' big worries. So into 1991, Gulf War ends, Yeltsin is elected president, Warsaw Pact formally dissolved. Yeah, August the 19th there was the coup attempt in Moscow by the Gang of Eight, with the KGB chief Vladimir Khrushchev at the helm. Yeah, this is what happened in real life. Gorbachev went under house arrest and ended up in house arrest in the Crimea. So we're following all of that. There was a lot of outcry on the streets in this, but they didn't have a figure to rally behind. Now, I know in the second edition, or 2.2 if you want to be exact, you have Yeltsin leading that. Now, what's not really often appreciated is that the KGB Alpha Group was given the command to go in and take him out, basically. If you remember the scenes where he stood on top of the tank, if you old like me and remember it. Now, the Alpha Group chief resigned. They gave the order to the deputy, who also resigned, and at that point the coup collapsed because they realised they weren't going to get anywhere. It wouldn't take a lot to make that the change point, and actually have. I've in my background, I've given a nod to it where the deputy agrees to do it. Yeltsin's killed and the sort of everything collapses. It notes as well that Estonia, Latvia and Lithuania have the Soviet forces occupying the TV towers and other strategic buildings, and there's big protests. There's protest in the West and the Soviet forces withdraw. So the Baltics are sort of de facto independent and very quickly actually do become independent and actually apply for NATO membership. So in 1992 there's purges within the Soviet government, there's economic reform, but a lot of Gorbachev's other reforms such as freedom of the press are revoked step by step. It says the international community sees the Soviet Union as weakened and America returns to a domestic agenda, with Bush losing to Clinton. Okay. 93, Clinton tries to show solidarity with the former Warsaw Pact countries, visits Poland and the Baltics, tells them they can count on NATO's support, and eventually membership. Soviets protest, and nothing else comes of that. Very realistic. The Russians were paranoid about NATO moving east. If you'd lived through the two world wars in Russia, you would understand why. The suffering of the Russian people in the Second World War is phenomenal, and the further they can put their boundary to the west, the safer they feel. The more buffer states they've got, the better. So 1994, in 1993, sorry, Yannanayev dies under mysterious circumstances. Khrushchev now becomes the president of the USSR, and there's rumours of more purges. So 1994, Spike in oil prices, comprehensive economic reforms, Soviet economy starts to pick up. And they use the windfall of this to actually try and modernise the Red Army. Okay, it's definitely in need of it at that point. It's at a real low in real life. It says they get about getting new equipment. Not a lot of this appears to be in the rules as yet. Whether that will appear in future supplements, I don't know. But it does seem to have the end of Cold War gear as the main. So at 1995, Khrushchev starts saber rattling, talking about how you had the illegal exit of the Baltic states. Clinton administration regard this as just saber rattling and ignore it. Doesn't ever say what happens to the republics, particularly the stands, or ghastly stand as they're frequently known in wargaming circles. Doesn't emphasise what's going on with them. I'm kind of guessing without the Western support they're probably going to be back in the Soviet sphere of influence, quite probably violently, which could easily have been kept fairly quiet. So yeah, I can see that happening. So 1996 we get the move into Estonia, Latvia and Lithuania to protect Russian minorities. I do sense a sort of degree of influence from real life there. US is quite surprised. Clinton hesitates. I'm wondering whether we've had the intervention in Somalia and Black Hawk Down, which might make him even more worried about sort of intervening abroad. He doesn't do much. The Baltic republics come back into the Soviet fold. Well, there's some guerrilla action. Soviets mobilise along the borders of Poland and Finland. UN condemns but doesn't actually do anything. I do think when history of the later part of the 20th century is written, the League of Nations the United Nations will be seen very much as the League of Nations and very, very, very powerless. I think that's again fairly accurate. While all this is going on, obviously election year in America, which is another good reason for Clinton not to intervene, and you have an ex-Lieutenant General from the Marine Corps defeats Bob Dole in the Republican primaries and challenges Clinton. Yeah, name of West. I'm kind of guessing there's another cardinal direction involved there. So West becomes president and starts pushing things military straight away. He starts beefing up the forces in Germany, not including tactical nuclear weapons. The USS Harry S. Truman, the new aircraft carrier, pushes into the Baltic. He's definitely pushing his luck with some of these. Khrushchev panics a little with this, and concerned that Poland will soon be part of NATO, he pushes into Poland. He uses rioting in Poland, pro-Soviet riots. When the Poles intervene militarily with that, he then uses the safeguarding Russian minorities card and goes in. West is willing to intervene, but only with air power. I think, again, for those who lived through that era, that's very realistic. There was a massive American reluctance to put boots on the ground unless they could win very quickly. The Russians escalate it back by bombing NATO bases in the UK, Germany and Turkey. That pulls NATO into the war, and very quickly the Soviets close in on the Oder River, which is the border with the reunified Germany. Eventually West realises that what he's doing is not going to achieve what they need, and he basically starts putting troops into the Czech Republic, Slovakia, Hungary and Romania, bringing them into the NATO sort of side, even if they're not actually members. The reserves are being activated. In June, 6th of June, for the first time US and Soviet ground troops engage each other. The Soviets then move into Hungary, Romania and Slovakia, presumably to stop a flanking attack. The Harry S. Truman starts fighting with the Soviet Baltic Fleet. Sweden is gradually drawn into the war, initially by the Americans demanding access rights. This isn't given, and there's a very short, sharp battle. US Marines landing in Sweden, and the Swedish very quickly sue for a ceasefire. Big debate as to whether that is seen as something that was just deliberately done. That's the Russian view. The Americans regard it as more that they genuinely have beaten the Swedes. The Swedes regard very divided. They regard it as a very pragmatic approach. So that there's quite a bit going off there. So we now have Sweden being involved in the war, initially against the Americans, but very quickly against the Soviets as the Soviets start pushing into that. And we move into 1998. The Middle East kicks off. The Israelis withdraw from southern Lebanon under sort of pressure from Hezbollah. Haifa al-Assad in Syria then sees this as the opportunity to attack Israel, particularly with American involvement elsewhere. Now, bearing in mind the 1973 Yom Kippur War, how quickly the advanced munitions run out, he is probably gambling that there won't be enough munitions supplied to the Israelis to keep going. That's my take on that. Particularly well. It doesn't work on the Golan Heights, bogs down. And very quickly the Israelis actually launch a counter-attack into Syria, pushing towards Damascus, which is, if you look at a map, is a very easy objective once you have the Golan Heights. As a result, the Syrians use their stockpile of chemical munitions against the Israelis and start pushing them back. They're also getting support from the Russians and from Iran. Bit of an oddity, Iran and Syria working together. However, I think it's back to the enemy of my enemy is my friend moment. I think that could probably be the solution there. Israel asks for US help. The Americans don't react quickly enough, and the Israelis start using nuclear weapons. This actually halts the Syrians. So the Americans now start the selective service system and introduce a massive draft, 500,000 men. Reaction varies. Some people are supportive, others are very anti. There's rioting over some of that, but it's still continuing. Yeah, I think that's probably a fairly accurate one when you look at what was happening in Vietnam. I think they've sort of copied that there. Gradually, NATO is now starting to push the Russians back. That would make sense with the Soviet reserve forces being used now. They're not as well equipped. NATO reserves are better equipped, so I can see the tide gradually swinging. The Soviets now go nuclear, start dropping tactical nukes. That basically devastates NATO. NATO now, just to hold on, start back. It gradually escalates. Places like the UK are hit. Gradually ICBMs are starting to be used. It's the EMP that causes the massive problem, the electromagnetic pulse. Just like in the earlier editions, this devastates communications. Massive civil unrest in the United States. Street fighting, rioting. Government agencies are rumoured to be fueling some of this. Some of them are sort of almost helping secessionists. Okay, yeah, America is an interesting place. I can't see that as being unrealistic. There will be sort of various issues going off with that, so yeah. The Russians then try another offensive and actually start moving in southern attack, moving through the Czech Republic, Austria and then into southern Germany. reaching Dresden, Leipzig and Nuremberg before another wave of tactical weapons hit them. Doesn't mention what the German response to that is, to weapons being used on German soil. I'm kind of guessing not good. At this point the reinforcements start becoming available. Now, getting them across the Atlantic with an air and sea bridge, the Soviets do a massive attempt to interfere with it. They cause heavy losses, but are shattered as a result. The point that the game makes, which is very interesting, is that they now don't have the capacity to evacuate because the damage has been so vast to the US fleet. Okay, that's a nice little thought, that one. Doesn't specify what happens with them. There's a lot of troops appearing. I'm guessing a lot of them are used to bump up units. The original game had some diverted to the south of Europe as well, into places like Yugoslavia. I can see that happening. So 1999, the winter is one of the worst ever. By this point, 15% of the population, confirm that, yeah, 15% deaths in most cities. Worse is yet to come. The food supplies start breaking down, the food chains collapsed, and you're almost sort of getting a famine of African proportions there. Speaking of Africa and South America, they haven't been hit by the war, but with the collapse in world trade and almost stopping of shipping of fuel, they have their own problems. Come the spring, you then get epidemics, typhoid, cholera, bubonic plague. They start sweeping the ravaged country. Population is down to half by the end of the year. Front lines now have pretty much collapsed. It's more a case of military occupied zones. Spare parts are becoming rare. Sophisticated ammunition is pretty much gone. Divisions are down to about 10% strength, and a lot of it is now living off the land. Now, when you start looking at the logistics of living off the land, that brings up a lot of interesting points. In particular, yes, you can feed your troops, but what about moving them? What about replacing ammunition? That's where you start having your problems. More and more local militias start appearing. Some of these are pro one side or pro the other. Most are just fighting for their communities. The US, well, the US has basically collapsed. The federal government is giving orders, but it's not actually doing much. Some of the states have actually declared independence. And most of them just quietly ignore the federal government and start working on their own. Then we get to the 2000. Civil rules basically ceased in Europe. Gradually the fighting's dying down up until April, when word starts to trickle down about Operation Reset. Now, Reset, they've hinted at a few times in this. More and more information is going to follow on that in future supplements, which I can't wait for. And it's the last major offensive of the war by the Americans. It starts out well, with surprise basically, being the biggest weapon. It doesn't last, but a week of NATO gains, and then the Soviets start responding, and they hit back hard, using again pretty much the last resources that they have, and the offensive grinds to a halt. The game is pretty much due to start at this point, where the 5th Division is overrun at Calais, and the tagline that has been used for every edition, "Good luck, you're on your own." I like that touch. It was nice to see that put back in. So that's the history aspect of it. Now, keen-eyed viewers of the channel who've looked at the first edition of this, the alpha, will go, you haven't mentioned Great Britain. Yeah, Britain doesn't get mentioned. The Soviet invasion has been removed. Now I know that was regarded as one of the least likely aspects. A little bit frustrating given the fact I've now started building up a Soviet airborne force to use for that, but hey, I can live with that. It's got uses elsewhere. Now, Britain is now written up differently. It's collapsed very badly. Areas are going for independence. Scotland and Wales are pretty much de facto independent. Larger other areas are as well. Government is very much confined to the south of England, or if you want to be really technical, the southeast. And it's moved very much closer to what we had in the Survivor's Guide to the UK in the first edition. I like that. It's, like I said, it was something that people did find unrealistic previously. It's showing more signs have been written by somebody who actually understands the UK than the Survivor's Guide to the UK. There are plenty of hints as to where it could go. We do have equivalent to the American Legion still floating around. They've been formed up. They're seen as a bit more independent in this. They're less likely to be backing His Majesty's government. There's enough potential there for me to start running games. I would love to see more information on the UK officially. I'm hoping that will come out in the near future. Up until then, we're going to have to make our own background for that. But I'm looking forward to it. It's only subtly changed from the alpha, but it's subtly changed in a good way. There are some nice thoughts gone into it. There's some well considered things in there. People said that they thought the Russians had it too easy. I'm not so sure. I think it's balanced in that sense. You haven't got the first edition's problem of the Chinese border that you had. Again, I'll be interested to see what's going on over that side of the world. So the Russians are at full strength. They haven't got the Warsaw Pact allies with them this time. That, I suppose, balances out. You've also got the chance with the bit of economic reform to actually build up the army. Like I said, I don't see a lot of evidence in that. I'm guessing that the budget was spent more on the soft aspects. Perhaps we're looking more at radios, training, officer training in particular, bearing in mind that the NCOs in the Soviet army were used very differently. Hopefully, from the perspective of game balance, they've learned that you had the Chechnya conflict, which would give them the experience of fighting in cities. So you do have a chance to bring in things like the Terminator and their other infantry support vehicles. Yeah, it's viable. I'll be fascinated to see where we go with it. It's, being honest, more realistic than we had in the first edition one, because when you read that and you went, Italy's on the Warsaw Pact side, that was a major shock to the system. So it's plausible background, and I think Free League have now got it right, and it's nice to see they've listened to the fans. Hopefully you found that useful. I'll be doing some more reviews of some of the other aspects of the beta, and I'll see you soon for that. Until then, take care of yourselves.